I then had an opportunity to become one of the first female chefs in Ireland, which sounds crazy these days. But using prayers of people from the past today, it's like you're agreeing in prayer with people of old for now. Ichthus is a place where you can train, learn about the scriptures and do practical evangelism. Yeah, my name is Shirley and I was born in Dublin, which is in the Republic of Ireland. And I grew up in a place called Blackrock, which is fairly near the sea. I enjoyed rock pooling and going to the sea. We were very familiar with the tides, but if you've ever been to Dublin, you know Dublin Bay is very flat. So if you got it wrong, you would have to walk for miles to be able to swim. So we were absolute experts at when the sea was coming in and when the sea was going out. And I once swam on Christmas Day when I was 13 because my father promised to give me, and this is telling my age, 10 shillings, which is equivalent to 50 pence, if I would swim in the sea on Christmas Day, which I did. So I'm always up for a challenge. I had an older sister who was profoundly deaf. She went deaf when she was about 4 or 5 due to a problem with her eardrums. So I was very kind of being a younger sister, and yet in some ways I was like the older sister because she had to go through a lot of operations and pressures. So my mother was a great one for taking not just me, but my cousins and other children to the zoo, to museums. She was a great one for taking us out and about. Even though there was unfortunately plenty of health pressures in our family, my father suffered from mental health due to work pressures. And when I was, I'm trying to think now, when I was about 14 or 15, my mother first became ill. So, you know, that was not an easy time, but in amongst all those pressures, we did have lots of fun, going bike rides and pooling in the rocks. And we even named all the rocks down by a place called Sea Point. We'd mapped out the rock pools and we knew which one was what. Yeah. It was very unusual looking back because I was a believer growing up in a Church of Ireland background. So I was put forward for confirmation and I wanted to be confirmed because I wanted to be able to take communion, the breaking of bread. And in that tradition, you needed to be confirmed. And at the time, I wasn't sure what was happening, but we had to go forward and the Archbishop of Dublin laid his hands on us. And looking back, I really had an experience of the Holy Spirit at that time, as did some other friends of mine who were also believers who were confirmed at that time. But at the same time, I was going to these Easter camps and summer camps who are run by some wonderful men and women who really love Jesus from completely different tradition. They were open brethren, some of them or most of them, and that's where I was discipled. I started to go to an open brethren church in the evening that put on a youth service, and that's where I began my discipleship journey. I finished school at 17 and had the opportunity to go into the hospitality industry, which suited my skill set. And I did 2 years at Catering College, was very involved. I was head of the student union. We had sit-downs and all kinds of crazy things because the lecturers went on strike, so we had demonstrations. And, you know, I love a cause, I guess. Anyway, what happened was I then had an opportunity to become one of the first female chefs in Ireland, which sounds crazy these days, but back then, kitchens and going on in the art or the craft of being a chef was very male dominated, as it is still today, to be honest. But myself and another girl were offered this opportunity to do a further 3-year training. So I did training for 5 years altogether in a top hotel in Dublin that had just newly opened, and had the privilege of, you know, going right in at the beginning of something, which made me realize I really enjoy pioneering situations. So that's a theme through my life, which is interesting when you look back. You don't realize it at the time. But the pressure of working in the kitchen, doing shift work, obviously the emotional, spiritual pressure that I'd been under caused me to have an emotional breakdown. And a very kind aunt and very kind Christian people around me. So the Lord provided both within my family and in the church family. I started my healing journey. I was able to continue to work. I first encountered kind of mission and pushing out in a sort of wider sphere when the ship Logos came to Dublin when I was 17. I'd just finished school, and I just thought, this is great. I'm off school, I can go and volunteer. I've still got the picture today of all the volunteers in Dublin. Now, Ireland's a very small country. It's bigger now, but at that time there was 3 million plus population and not so many believers, God-fearing people, but not so many believers in Jesus at that time. And maybe proudly I thought I knew them all. But when I went to the first Logos meeting, I knew no one. And I remember somebody at the front saying, right, I want you to turn to your neighbour and pray. Well, this was radical. I'd never in my life turned to somebody I didn't know and started praying. So that was exciting and scary at the same time. So after 2 weeks of volunteering in Dublin, I had the opportunity to sail with the Logos to Glasgow for another 2-week mission. At the time, my mother wasn't particularly well, but both my parents really encouraged me to go. And I have the fond memory of watching my parents wave me off from the quayside in Dublin where the Logos was docked. So I then sailed to Glasgow, slept in a tiny little cabin with another girl, and had a really incredible time. We were doing lots of practical things like washing an awful lot of dishes and peeling an awful lot of potatoes, but I was with people from all over the world. And what used to happen on the Logos, and still does, I believe, to this day, is they sail into a port, it has a proper opening with dignitaries coming, so all the preparation for that, book exhibitions, so the general public were invited on board and they would have access to educational books, Christian books, and we would serve in that way. And also teams went out into the local area working with local churches to do evangelism and outreach of all kinds. Obviously, I've mentioned I then trained in catering and hospitality, and I was working in the high end of the industry, which used my artistic skills, but I didn't feel called to stay within that area of work because it demands your all. And I didn't just want to do it mediocre. If I was going to stay in it, I wanted to give it my all. And that would have meant probably not being able to go to church or serve on mission so well. So I decided that I wanted to do further training. And at that time, there was no evangelical Bible college in Ireland, in Southern Ireland. My youth leader had taken a team of Irish teenagers to Capernwray when I was younger. So I'd heard of Capernwray, which is a discipleship Bible college. And I went there for the academic year, 9 months. Interestingly, it was while I was at Capernwray that we had to join a prayer group. And I just decided I'd pray for Asia and Pakistan because it sounded interesting. I had no idea where Pakistan was. I just knew that when you looked at the world map, it was somewhere on the right, near India. I joined with 2 men who actually had been in OM, and it was just really fantastic to be able to pray with them. There might have been some other people, but those 2 guys really stood out because they knew how to pray for the world and they loved Jesus. I prayed dangerous prayers about the Lord sending people out to tell others about Jesus. And I guess in some ways I might have become the answer to my own prayers by going to Pakistan some years later. So I went there. It was in the early 80s when Russia had invaded Afghanistan and pushed the Afghans into the top of Pakistan. So there was a lot going on in the country at the time. And I went to the OM base and was able to use my skills from hospitality background to help run the OM base. So I was very much in Lahore, which is the second largest city in Pakistan. It's not the capital, Karachi is. But it was quite claustrophobic, if I'm honest, because women can't easily go out. I wore shalwar kameez, which is the national dress. You had to cover your head when you went anywhere. You couldn't go out on your own. You had to go with a couple of guys or maybe 2 women sometimes in certain situations was all right. So going to the market was both interesting and fun at the same time. When I say interesting, it could be challenging because you had 2 men with you to carry the stuff who mainly spoke the language, but I was the one knowing what supplies I needed. So yeah, so it was an interesting time. But I also did have the privilege of going to a college where girls were being trained to go back into their villages to teach religious education. They were Christian, from a Christian minority background. They weren't necessarily all believers in Jesus, more maybe that was their heritage with a Christian background. And they were girls who were educated to maybe a middling level. They were not academics, but they were being educated to be like primary school or elementary school teachers, and they were needing to be taught religious education. So I was asked would I go and do that. So I did that for a while, and that was quite an interesting challenge. Never thought I would have been teaching teachers about religious education. While I was in OM, I realised that church planting or evangelism is wonderful, and it's great if local churches disciple and pick up the people who come to know the Lord. And I began to hear about this thing called church planting. And actually at the time, Ray Mayhew, who was on the leadership of Ichthus, I believe, if I've got my facts right, was also on the board of SERVE. And SERVE was one of the organisations that was helping with the Afghans in Pakistan. So I actually met Ray and another gentleman who were part of Ichthus in Pakistan. So I'd heard of Ichthus from different angles, and also my previous youth leader had come to live in London and was part of Ichthus. And I realised heard about them doing church planting and was fascinated by it. And anyway, long story short, I ended up coming to Ichthus because I wanted further training in church planting and how, if we reach out to people, how can we gather those people to be discipled if there isn't that available in a particular country or situation. So Ichthus was running a short-term training course called Well Diggers at the time in Camberwell, and I came and was accepted on that with some other young people, and the objective was to reach out and with an experienced person to start a congregation church plant in Camberwell. So we did weeks of mission and made puppets and ran kids clubs, and that was my introduction to learning about church planting. And I guess I'm still learning because however many years later, I'm still in London, and I felt the Lord called me to London. I did go back to Ireland, and it's very interesting when you're on the move with the Lord. What I've discovered is sometimes you get lots of interesting offers, and I think I lost count after about 5 or 6 different people asking me to do different things in Ireland. And in the end, I just knew I had to hear from the Lord. And I was sitting on a rock overlooking Dublin Bay, and the Lord gave me a particular scripture, which I think it's in Isaiah, if I remember rightly. And it talks about making his deeds known among the peoples or the nations. And Ireland at that time was we weren't, cross-cultural. There wasn't a lot of people coming to Ireland. Ireland was very poor at that time. There was no attraction to go to Ireland. More people left Ireland than came to Ireland. But I realised that London is full of people from all over the world. So I felt, even though it seemed a strange decision and some people didn't understand it, including my old church, I left and came to London. I first damaged my back when I was a chef, and it turns out I've got slight scoliosis in my back. So I couldn't carry on doing chef work. and an opportunity came to work for an organisation called Peckham, which was originally founded by Baptist Church in Peckham and by Ichthus, and Roger very much prayed for the person who had the vision for that, Simon Pellew. And I worked for Peckham for 15 years, doing project work on the North Peckham estate, the old Camden estate, and also the fact that we could pray. We saw amazing things happening, and many people did get jobs and be able to fulfill their lives. But when I got married, Bruce and I decided after some time that we would both do RadNet, and that's what we did for a year. And then I had the opportunity to go back into working for a secular organisation in Southwark doing employment support. So I went back to doing that kind of work for a secular organisation, and of course bringing my faith into it privately and praying for my clients privately. And if they asked me, of course I would share, but not many opportunities presented publicly. But I did see some interesting answers to prayer along the way. And my boss at the time was very, very insistent about people learning. And because of my dyslexia and maybe the lack of opportunity back in when I was at school, there wasn't voice activation software or even computers, would you believe it? I was able to do some training, which then meant I was able to do further training by going to London South Bank University. And I felt it was something that I wanted to do, not for myself, but I could see that I could help maybe young adults coming up if I had more skills. But I was very nervous about it because writing papers is not my strongest point. But my husband Bruce is much more academic than me, and he said, well, just do one term. And he enabled me to access academia because I could dictate my work to him. So anyway, I was successful and graduated from London South Bank with the level 7 in career guidance, and I'm still a member of the Career Development Institute. I don't work in that now, but I do pro bono work within Ichthus if there are young adults or adults who need some support. Because of my dyslexia and things that have happened to me, I wasn't that confident. Maybe I didn't love myself as I should. So there was a healing journey when I was younger on that. And I got to a point probably in my mid-30s when I thought, well, am I going to be single? And if I am, then I want to know that that's what the Lord wants for my life. And if I'm not, then could the Lord show me? And don't misunderstand me, there were struggles, but I came to that point because I just wanted to get on with my work and serving the Lord and just getting on with life. I didn't want it to take up emotional or mental energy. So I gave it to the Lord, and in a very unusual way, I knew the Lord said, you will know today. And I went to a leadership meeting and somebody had been invited to it. And he said, I never usually give this kind of word, but he gave me some other prophetic words, and he's a known person who had been to Ichthus. And he prophesied that I would meet somebody and marry them. And it just settled it for me. Now, I normally would not have paid too much attention to that, and he clearly was not used to giving that kind of word, and he said so, because the Lord had said I'd know that day. And so I think it was about 10 or 15 years later that I met Bruce. So it settled it, because I didn't want it to take up headspace and emotional space. But I had also, along the way, been able to, I was privileged in being able to get a home for myself after many years of living in all sorts of different houses with many, many addresses, much to the dismay of my friends and family. When was I ever going to settle down? I got a home for myself, but I always felt that the Lord had given it to me, but actually it was his, not mine. So if people came to live with me like lodgers, it was their home as well. So I kind of had that discipline that I shared what I had. So looking back, that prepared me for marriage. That I didn't have this is mine and this is yours. It was like people who came to live in the house, if they wanted to put a picture up in their bedroom, that was their choice. And I just had to die to what I thought about them, nail into the wall, because it was as much their house as mine. So, yeah, so we got married, and as I said, we did Radnet, and then my husband set up his own business. And I wasn't sure. I felt the Lord say to me to just trust him about where we were going to go to church. It wasn't something I was going to insist on or say you must come here or there, but actually it was my husband's decision that he wanted to be part of Ichthus because he could see, he knew obviously of Ichthus because of being involved with Peckham back in the 80s, late 80s. And he could see that it's where my gifting and his gifting could be used. I have received a tremendous amount of both spiritual and emotional healing because of some negative spiritual pressures in my family life. I needed to be cut off from that negative impact and be set free from the oppressions that brought. So I experienced that spiritual healing, and the emotional healing came because of the revelation of Jesus's love being ministered throughout as I walked forward with him. There wasn't sort of one specific occasion. I think also I had to come to terms with the fact my mother did believe in Jesus in her simple way, and back then there was a gentleman in Ireland who had a healing ministry, a clergyman actually, and she did get prayed and anointed with oil, but she wasn't healed. But what I found very helpful was the teaching in Ichthus that we are in the overlap of the ages. We don't always see physical healing. And also we're in a span of time. This is not the end of our lives. Some people may receive, I suppose you could put it in my simple way, healing when they die and go to be with the Lord. It's not the end of things. They will rule and reign with Christ. So that helped me to understand, and I kind of received the Lord's love and healing and was able to give the kind of sadness and disappointment of my mum dying. And I have experienced healing in maybe not supernatural ways, but in practical ways, like my achieving a higher level qualification to help others when I was in my 50s. That in a way brought healing, a redemption. And it's interesting, as I look back, I was given a scripture years ago about the Lord would restore the years the locust has eaten. So these spiritual and physical pressures, the restoration has come as I've kept going forward with Jesus. So there's no one moment in time. There are situations and times where people have prayed that I've known deliverance and healing and cleansing. My prayer life was shaped, as I said earlier, my mother taught me to pray very simple prayers. So it was something that I was shaped from an early age, that prayer was a daily thing, even though I might have resented it or not quite understood it. But it was when the OM ship came, and, you know, OM was a movement of faith. They had to pray in every litre of fuel, every bag of potatoes, you know, and pray for the world. So we could tangibly see the answers to prayer. And then in my own life, I had to pray in the money to go with OM. So I guess it was through seeing those answers that my prayer life grew. And because of that picture book that I still have of Jesus, Friend of Children, I knew you could talk to him. I knew you could ask him to help. I sometimes didn't always understand why I didn't get the answer. But for me, I guess the sort of leap forward in my prayer life came through reading a book. An American guy called Larry Lee wrote a book about, won't you tarry, won't you stay with me 1 hour to pray? And it's a model of using the Lord's Prayer, how to pray. And I started to do that every day, and it just really increased my faith. praying the names of God, you know, that he's our shepherd, our banner, our healer, provider. And yeah, that was a very clear stepping stone in my prayer life. And then obviously working for Peckham, praying, seeing the actual physical area of Peckham redeveloped and changed. Ichthus was involved in those days in praise marches. They had a laundrette on one of the estates. And then Peckham worked there. There was so much prayer going on from Roger and Ichthus and the other churches in Peckham, because that area was no go. No post was delivered, very deprived. And seeing that physical transformation that can come about when God's people go in his love and prayer really impacted my life. And I remember when I first came to do prayer walking in Peckham and Camberwell area, I passed a block of flats called Shirley House. And I thought nobody lived there, it was so derelict. And then I realised people lived there. That block of flats is still there today, but completely regenerated. And it just reminds me that that's prayer. The answer to prayer is bearing fruit. And then the next step forward came when I was doing RadNet, and we had to do 2 study papers, and I did it on prayers in the Bible was one of them, and Faith Foster was very helpful in giving me prayers from the sort of radical church history. And there isn't a lot recorded because that particular stream of church history, there's a lot of persecution. And I put together a prayer booklet which includes prayers from the Bible, written prayers from the Bible. And I just found written prayers and prayers, using prayers of people from the past and using them today. It's like you're agreeing in prayer with people of old for now. And it's very powerful. And also it helps to focus prayer. So for example, the Ephesians prayer, praying for the revelation of Jesus in our lives, Paul's prayer, it's very powerful. Well, Jesus is the same yesterday, today and forever. So we have the assurance that Jesus is with us. And I think the challenge for me is to keep growing in his love and to look for opportunities to share that love in appropriate ways with those who are younger. I particularly have a heart to pray for young adults, maybe because I can see the value of where I am today because there are older people who loved me and prayed for me. Some I knew of, some I didn't. And I doubt I'd be here today if I didn't have those prayers and that support. So as I look forward, I'm excited to be able to do that as the Lord opens up opportunities and to see what he's going to do in London and beyond.